She's been acting strange, Lorraine. And honestly, I'm worried about you living alone in that big house. We think it's time you came to stay with us. That was my daughter talking, and the she was referring to was me. I was sitting right there at my own kitchen table, drinking coffee from my own mug, in the house I had lived in for 31 years. I almost laughed. Almost. My name is Lorraine, and I was 67 years old when my husband Arthur died. We had been married for 41 years. He was a quiet man, an accountant, methodical, careful, the kind of person who balanced the checkbook every Sunday morning before church and kept every receipt in a manila folder labeled by month. He wasn't romantic in the conventional sense. He didn't bring me flowers or write poems, but he paid attention to everything. That was his way of loving. He died on a Tuesday in March. A heart attack, no warning. One minute he was here, the next he wasn't. The doctor said it was fast, that he likely didn't feel much. I don't know if that was true or if they say that to everyone. Either way, I was alone in our house by Tuesday evening, and the world felt like it had been tilted 3 degrees off its axis. Not enough to fall, just enough that nothing felt steady anymore. My daughter? I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is, though some days that word feels like it belongs to a different relationship than the one we have now. She drove up from Columbus the next morning with her husband, Kevin. They stayed through the funeral. They were kind, efficient, grief made practical. They arranged the catering for the reception. They accepted condolences on my behalf when I couldn't speak. I was grateful. I told myself that. What I didn't tell myself, not yet, was that I noticed how she walked through the rooms, not with grief, with assessment. She opened closets. She looked at the backyard. She asked twice about the mortgage. There wasn't one. Arthur had paid it off in 2019. And I saw something flicker across Kevin's face when I told him that, something I chose not to name at the time. They went back to Columbus after 9 days. Life resumed, or tried to. I went to grief counseling on Thursday afternoons at the Lutheran Church on Maple. I had coffee with my neighbor Bet on Wednesdays. I got through November, then the holidays, which were brutal in the specific quiet way that first holidays always are. I cried on Christmas morning looking at Arthur's chair. Then I made myself scrambled eggs and watched an old movie and got through the day. By February, I was finding my footing, not healed. I don't think grief works that way. Not at 67, not after 41 years, but functional, present, starting to imagine what the next chapter might look like. That was when my daughter called and said she and Kevin had been talking, and they thought it made more sense for me to come live with them. I told her I wasn't ready to make that kind of decision. She said she understood. Then she called again the following week, and the week after that. In March, almost exactly 1 year after Arthur died, they drove up again. This time, they brought boxes. I want to be precise here because precision matters when you're trying to explain how something like this happens to a person who considered herself intelligent, capable, and not naive. They didn't force anything. They didn't shout. What they did was more like water on limestone, patient, persistent, wearing away at something solid through sheer repetition. My daughter started mentioning things I'd forgotten. Not unusual things. I forgot where I put my reading glasses. I missed a dentist appointment I'd rescheduled twice already, but she mentioned them with a particular tone. Gently concerned. The way you might speak about someone who is declining. Mom, you left the back door unlocked again. Mom, you told me that story already about the lady from Grief Group 3 times now. Mom, I found an unpaid water bill on the counter. How long has that been sitting there? The water bill was 11 days old. I had been intending to pay it online. I told her that. She nodded slowly like I'd said something both plausible and sad. Kevin started suggesting I shouldn't be driving at night. Not in a confrontational way. Just mentioning it. The way you mention that someone's tire looks a little low, like it's a small practical observation and not an excavation of your independence. I started to feel foggy, not because anything was actually wrong with me. I understand that now. But because when people you love treat you like something is wrong with you, you start to audit every ordinary moment for evidence. I second-guessed myself. I apologized for things that didn't need apology. I began to feel vaguely grateful that they were there to manage things. That is, I think, exactly what they intended. In April, they moved into my guest room. Temporarily, my daughter said, just until we figured out a long-term plan. Kevin was between jobs. He'd left his position at a logistics company under circumstances that were never fully explained to me, and they'd had to let their apartment lease lapse. It made sense, she said, for everyone. I gave them the guest room. I told myself it was temporary. By June, Kevin had a desk set up in Arthur's study. My daughter had reorganized my kitchen. She'd moved the coffee maker, thrown out spices she deemed expired, rearranged the plates. Small things, the kind of thing a person does when they are making themselves at home, not when they are a guest in yours. She also started coming with me to appointments. My doctor first. She sat in the exam room and answered questions that were directed at me. Dr. Peterson. I'd been seeing her for 12 years. Gave me a look I didn't fully decode at the time. I thought she was just noting that I had support. I know now she was noting something else. Then my bank. My daughter suggested we add her to my accounts. For convenience, she said, in case something happened to me and bills needed to be paid. It made sense the way she described it, and I was tired in a way I couldn't explain, a low-grade exhaustion that had settled into my bones sometime in May and hadn't left. I said I'd think about it. She brought it up again 2 weeks later, and then I got a phone call. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the garden, which is the place I go when I need to feel like myself. Arthur built the raised beds the summer he retired. We'd planted tomatoes, basil, 2 kinds of peppers. I still planted every year. I think I planted partly as an act of faith and partly as an act of stubbornness, and maybe there's no real difference between those things. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. The man on the other end said, "Is this Lorraine?" "This is Stuart Gaines. I was Arthur's accountant for about the last 8 years. I'm sorry to bother you. I've actually been trying to reach you for a couple of months, but I wasn't sure how to well. I'm sorry for your loss, first of all. I wondered if we might be able to meet. There's something Arthur asked me to hold for you." I stood in the garden with my hand tight around the phone. "What kind of something?" I asked. "I'd rather show you in person," he said, "and he was specific about one thing. He asked that you come alone." I knew better than to tell my daughter. The next morning, I said I had a follow-up with my optometrist. This was not technically a lie. I did have an upcoming appointment, just not that day. I drove to Stuart Gaines's office on the east side of town, a modest brick building near the park where Arthur and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. I had driven past it 100 times without knowing what it was. Stuart was a trim man in his early 60s, the kind of person who seemed to have his life organized in a way that made you feel calmer just being in his presence. He offered me coffee. He sat across from me with a plain manila envelope on the desk between us, and before he handed it to me, he said, "Arthur came to see me about 14 months before he died. I don't think he knew his heart was bad. He hadn't been diagnosed, but he said something that stuck with me. He said, 'Stuart, I want to make sure Lorraine is taken care of in a way that I control, not in a way that anyone else controls.'" He was very calm about it, very deliberate. I felt something in my chest that I can't entirely name. It wasn't quite grief. It was more like recognition. That was Arthur. That was exactly him. Stuart slid the envelope across the desk. Inside was a letter in Arthur's handwriting, small, precise, the handwriting of a man who had filled out ledgers by hand for 30 years, and beneath the letter, a thumb drive. Arthur's letter was 4 pages long. I'm not going to share all of it. Some of it belongs only to me. But the relevant part, the part I can tell you, is this. He'd had concerns about Kevin for over 2 years before he died. Not explosive concerns, not dramatic ones. Arthur didn't deal in drama, he dealt in patterns. And the pattern he'd observed was this. Kevin had borrowed money from my daughter, who had borrowed it from their joint account, meaning Arthur's savings, twice without mentioning it. Small amounts the first time, larger the second. Arthur had said nothing because he didn't want to cause conflict and because he believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But he'd started keeping records. The thumb drive contained those records. He'd also consulted an estate attorney the previous spring, a woman named Sandra Cole, whose card was paper-clipped to the letter, and had restructured his will in a way I hadn't known about. The house was protected. A separate account, opened in my name alone, held a sum that Arthur had been quietly routing there for 2 years, not hidden from me in the sense of deception, hidden from anyone who might try to pressure me. There were clear instructions about what it was for: my security, my independence, my ability to leave any situation that didn't serve me. He'd written, near the end of the letter, "I know you're capable of handling anything. I just wanted to make sure the door was always open, even if someone tried to close it." I sat in Stuart's office for a long time. He didn't rush me. He brought me a second cup of coffee and waited. When I was ready, I asked him to walk me through the account. Then I asked him to connect me with Sandra Cole. I didn't go home right away. I drove to the park nearby, the one where Arthur and I used to walk, and I sat on a bench by the creek for almost an hour. It was a cool morning for October, the leaves just starting. I let myself cry, not the heavy grief crying of the first months, but something quieter, something that felt, strangely, almost like gratitude. Then I drove home and I started to plan. I want to be honest about something. I did not become decisive overnight. What I had experienced over those months, the slow, patient erosion of my confidence, the way I'd started apologizing for having opinions, the way I'd stopped trusting my own memory. That kind of thing doesn't reverse itself in a single afternoon. But what Stuart gave me that day wasn't just a letter and a thumb drive. It was evidence that my own sense of reality had been correct, that I wasn't confused, that I wasn't declining, that the fogginess I'd felt wasn't age or grief. It was the natural result of being told over and over in small, patient ways that I couldn't trust myself. That knowledge was worth more than I can say. I called Sandra Cole the next day. I told her the situation in the way I would have told it to Arthur, plainly with the relevant details in order. She asked good questions. She did not make me feel foolish for having let it go on as long as it had. She said she had seen this more times than she wished. We talked about what my rights were. We talked about the will and what protections were already in place. We talked about the account. And then I asked her the question I most needed to ask. If I asked them to leave my house, what happens? She was clear it was my house, solely in my name. They had no legal standing as tenants. They had not signed a lease. They paid no rent, and the arrangement had always been described as temporary. I would need to give written notice. She would help me draft it. I spent the following 2 weeks paying close attention, and what I saw, once I was looking clearly, was more than I'd let myself acknowledge before. Kevin had been accessing my Wi-Fi to run what appeared to be some kind of side business from Arthur's study. I found brochures, printed on my printer, for a home improvement company I couldn't find any record of online. My daughter had been intercepting some of my mail, not all of it, but I noticed a pattern of envelopes that seemed to have been opened and resealed, and 2 pieces that I know I should have received and never did. I didn't confront them, not yet. I made an appointment with my bank, and went alone and changed my account access. The teller was professional and made no comment, but as I was leaving, she said quietly, "We see this. You did the right thing." I held on to that. I called a locksmith and scheduled the lock change for a Thursday when my daughter had her standing hair appointment across town. Kevin had taken to spending Thursday mornings at the library. I didn't know what he did there, and I found I no longer cared. By the time my daughter's car turned onto our street at 12:30, the locks had been changed. Her key no longer worked, and there were two large suitcases on the front porch containing what I had packed from the guest room. Not everything. I could not access the study without Kevin being there, and I hadn't wanted a scene, but enough. I stood at the front window and watched her try her key. She knocked. Then she called my cell phone. I let it ring. She called again. I answered the second call. "Mom, what is this? What's going on? Why won't the key?" "I need you to leave," I said. "Your things are on the porch. I've changed the locks. The additional items from the study can be arranged for pickup within the week with someone else present." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I could hear a car passing in the background. "Mom." Her voice shifted, softer now. The concerned daughter. "Mom, I'm worried about you. I don't think you're well enough to be making decisions like this by yourself. Who told you to do this? Did someone get in your head?" I felt the familiar pull of it. The way that framing made me want to explain myself, justify myself, prove I wasn't confused. Instead, I said, "I have an attorney. Her name is Sandra Cole. Any further communication can go through her. Please take your things off the porch before dark." I hung up. She did not leave immediately. She sat in her car in my driveway for 40 minutes. Kevin arrived, and they spoke. Kevin tried the door. He tried to look in through the window beside the front door, and I was standing close enough that we made eye contact through the glass. I held his gaze. He looked away first. Eventually they left. Sandra helped me send the formal notice the following morning. We documented everything. The financial records Arthur had left, the evidence of the mail interference, the printed brochures. Sandra said it was enough to take further legal action if I wanted to. I thought about it for a long time. In the end, I didn't go that route. Not because I forgave what they'd done. I'm still working through what I feel about that, and I think that's probably honest. But because I wanted my life back more than I wanted the fight, the attorney fees, the months of litigation, the emotional cost of sitting across a table from my daughter in a courtroom, I calculated what it would cost me, not in dollars, but in the particular resource I now understood was most precious, my own peace. What I did do was contact the county's Adult Protective Services office and make a formal report. Not as an accusation. I was careful to frame it exactly as it was, but as a documentation of what had occurred. The caseworker I spoke with was thorough. She said the pattern I described was consistent with what they commonly refer to as financial elder abuse, even in cases where the amounts involved hadn't been large. She said documentation mattered, so I made sure it existed. I also wrote a letter to my daughter, not to send. I wrote it for myself, to say the things I needed to say in a form that had a beginning and an end. I described what I'd felt during those months. I described what it was like to stop trusting my own mind because the people closest to me kept suggesting I shouldn't. I described the moment in the garden when Stuart called and how I'd felt something release in me, like a door I didn't know was latched had finally swung open. I sealed the letter and put it in the fireproof box where I keep important papers, next to Arthur's letter. It's been 14 months now. I still live in my house. I still plant tomatoes every spring. My neighbor Bet comes over on Wednesdays and we drink coffee, and sometimes we do the crossword, and sometimes we just talk. I found a new grief group, a different one, smaller, on Tuesday evenings at the library, and I've made 2 friends there that I think might become real ones, the kind that last. I go to church on Sundays. I drive myself. I drive at night when I need to. Dr. Peterson, at my last appointment, said I seemed like myself again. I told her I was. She smiled in a way that suggested she understood more than we'd ever said out loud about those months, and that was enough. I think about Arthur often, not with the raw grief of the first year, but with something that has mellowed into something like companionship. He is still present to me in the way that people who have loved you well remain present. In the garden he built, in the way I think through problems carefully before I act, in the knowledge that he paid attention all those years and trusted me with the proof of it when I needed it most. The door, he wrote, was always open. He was right, it was, and I walked through it. I used to think that what happened to me couldn't happen to a woman like me. I was a retired school teacher. I had raised a daughter. I had managed a household for 4 decades, paid bills, made decisions, kept things running. And yet for almost a year I had been quietly convinced that I was losing my mind. By the 2 people living under my roof, eating at my table, sleeping in my guest room. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the anger, though the anger was there, but the sheer clarifying shock of realizing that my own instincts had been right all along and I had been talked out of trusting them. Arthur understood something that I think a lot of people don't want to believe about the people they love, that good intentions and harmful actions are not mutually exclusive. He didn't assume the worst about our daughter, but he paid attention. He kept records. He acted quietly and without drama because that was his character. And his character, it turned out, was the thing that protected me long after he was gone. I think about what it takes to do what he did. It wasn't just love. Love alone doesn't make you sit down with an attorney 14 months before you die and restructure your estate to protect your spouse from a threat you can only sense but not yet name. What Arthur had was a kind of moral seriousness, a commitment to doing right by me that didn't depend on whether it was convenient or whether anyone would ever know, or whether it would cause conflict. He did it because it was the right thing, and he was the kind of man who did right things quietly. And what I had to find, what I had to choose, in that garden when Stuart called, and in Sandra's office, and standing at my own front window watching my daughter try a key that no longer worked, was whether I still trusted my own judgment, whether I was willing to act on what I knew to be true, even when I'd been told, over and over, that I couldn't trust what I knew. That is harder than it sounds. The gaslighting didn't work because I was foolish. It worked because I was grieving and exhausted, and I loved my daughter and I wanted to believe the version of events she was offering me. Wanting to believe someone you love is not a character flaw, but letting that want override what your own clear eyes are telling you. That is something you can choose to stop doing. I chose to stop. I won't tell you it was easy, or that I don't still feel the loss of the relationship I thought I had with my daughter. I do. I grieve that separately, quietly, in the same way I grieve Arthur. Not all at once, but in small waves. Usually when I'm not expecting it. But I also wake up every morning in my own house, in the room I shared with Arthur for 31 years, and I make my own coffee. And I drive myself wherever I need to go, and no one tells me my memory is failing. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If there is anything I would want someone else to take from what happened to me, it is this. Pay attention to how you feel in your own home. Pay attention to whether the people around you make you feel more capable or less. And if you find, as I did, that someone has been slowly and patiently convincing you that you cannot trust yourself, trust yourself anyway. The clarity is still in there. It was never gone. It was only waiting for a door to open. Arthur left that door open for me, but I'm the one who walked through it.